Today's session, what we in Sri Lanka are most anxious about is consumer insights and data on travel intentions, which markets will be ready to travel to Sri Lanka, and tips for how your business can market and engage with these potential travelers. I'll take a minute to introduce the Tourism Alliance and today's program. The Alliance, as many of you know, was born a week after Easter Sunday's attacks last year, which is now a distant memory, by a private sector group who launched the Love Sri Lanka campaign that went viral. Since then, we've rallied over 400 tourism businesses at all levels, in all sectors, in Sri Lanka and overseas, to share the simple message that Sri Lanka is open, Sri Lanka is safe, and come visit. Membership is free. It's open to all involved in tourism, companies and individuals. Our objectives are to drive sustainable tourism visitor growth, benefiting all segments with a few high impact initiatives like this webinar series, collaborating with all existing industry associations. We have no personal agendas whatsoever. Our members come from absolutely every section of the industry. Betterment of Sri Lanka tourism is our only goal. The Alliance's new website, we've got an amazing new site that's launching next week. Look out for that. That has a whole bunch of learning tools, industry views and reports. It also has the first dedicated tourism jobs portal, which is really going to help when there is a resumption in tourism. We will be looking out for new employees as we were before the crisis. So I'd like to move on to today's program. Introducing Sarah Mathews, is Group Head of Destination Marketing, Asia Pacific at TripAdvisor. Her focus is to work and support tourism boards in APAC, as well as help local hospitality businesses to better understand the impact of digital to their businesses. Sarah is no stranger to Sri Lanka, having come here for the last 10 years or so. And just before we started, she said that Sri Lanka is an absolute favorite place in all the world. So I'm sure she'll give us a few tips with some passion. Hermione Joye is a sector lead travel Asia Pacific at Google. She works with leading online travel agents, airlines, and hotel chains to develop digital business strategies and products for Asian consumers. And she started out with Google in their Sydney office. Dileep Mudadeniya, CEO of Cinnamon Life Mall, Head of Brand Marketing at Cinnamon Hotels. That needs no introduction to you in the local market here. And most importantly, he's a founder member of the leadership group of the Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance. Then we have Niranka Perera, Chairman and CEO of Antyra Solutions, who are digital marketing gurus for the hospitality industry here in Sri Lanka. Last and not least, Katherine Droga, who now in Sri Lanka, thanks to these webinars in the tourism industry, is probably as well known as a BBC newsreader. She is our moderator today. She's a global tourism expert and advisor to the Alliance. Katherine Droga from Droga and Company specializes in destination and tourism business resilience strategies, marketing and communication. So please post questions if you're on Zoom or on the Q&A button icon you see at the top of your screen. And if you're on Facebook, on chat, and we will try and answer as many of them as we can. Those that we can't will be addressed in communications after this webinar. So over to Katherine and the eminent team. We are looking forward to a really great session. All the very best. I'm just going to zone out here of my video.
Thank you so much, Malik, and thank you again for all the participants for joining us, and all for our listeners. I know that if you haven't been able to get onto our Zoom, which was oversubscribed, we're live streaming on webinar. We're live streaming on our Facebook channel and on lots of other channels around Sri Lanka as well. So what I wanted to do with our discussion, we're really deep diving into the consumer data and sentiment at the moment globally. And what I would like to do with the flow of today is to start with our fantastic panelists to talk about domestic travel and domestic insights. Then we'll move into the international traveller and we'll weave in specific tips and learnings for you all around what you should be looking at from your marketing, your segmentation, your experiences, your messaging. So I'd like to kick off with Hermione first, and just from your perspective from Google, can you just take us through, you've done some really great research lately on consumer trends. Can you give us a little bit of an update around that research and what it's involved, and specifically what it's telling us about consumer sentiment for domestic travel at the moment?
Sure, Katherine. As you mentioned, we just launched a Think with Google article called The State of Travel in APAC, where we are identifying trends to try and prepare consumers for what we think will be a very different road ahead. That can be found on our Think with Google homepage for those who are interested, and that will be many of the stats that I'm referring to today. Part of launching this article was we ran 17 surveys in 17 countries, we ran surveys in 17 countries asking a number of questions about their sentiment to travel and about their desires when it came, what would be blockers or encouragements in terms of making them travel. And we've been doing this now for around, the data that we shared publicly is from April to May, but we've been doing this around since COVID really happened. And what we're seeing is there's a huge demand around APAC and the world for domestic travel. Consumers are much more comfortable traveling domestically, and they are more likely to travel via bus or train than perhaps a flight right now. And they would prefer to travel a shorter distance. So you're looking at trips between 0 to 3 hours. Within that, how we see APAC is a little bit different though, is that within some markets in APAC, there's a higher appetite to travel internationally once the borders are reopened, and that there is opportunity for international travel, which is unlike any other region across the world. So in the US and the EMEAs, we don't see that desire to travel internationally. But in APAC, India and Indonesians are keen to travel cross-border, which is a great highlight. But overall, we see around about 20% of APAC consumers saying that they would like to travel in the next 6 to 9 months, which is positive.
Fantastic. And one of the interesting points I also noticed in your data was a question you had about what would it take for you to book a hotel in the next 3 months? So it's a really specific, tangible question. And what were kind of the things and the trigger points that you found around that question?
I think the primary trend was cleanliness. That was top of mind for everyone across the board. So across the Asian markets, in some, and then the second trigger, so that would be depending by market. So in Australia and Japan, it would be having no cancellation fees. They want full flexibility. But then in, say, like Southeast Asia, they're after like a 25% discount. Overall, the biggest trend we've noticed, though, is that consumers are wanting discounted premium holidays. And premium experiences. There's a definite shift towards the 3+ hotels in terms of the appetite or the comfort that consumers have when traveling.
So what you're trying to say there that's really interesting is that the customer is prepared to still pay more for an experience. Then they're still looking for value with the discount, but they're open to still extending their budget to a broad amount of experiences and yield.
Yeah, I think what we've seen is basically they feel I'm interpreting the data, so, but they would feel more comfort in staying in the higher end hotels. But in order to do that, they would like a discount on their experience and flexibility around them.
That's those first 3 months. It's those first beginning travelers that are venturing out,
Yes.
To the world. Okay, thank you so much for that. I also would just make a point for those that have joined us that any of the data that we talk about today, we will be putting on the Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance website. So we'll share a few slides, but we'll also reference stats. And so we'll share the links to Hermione's study that we're talking about and the rest of the information as we go along. So Sarah, I'd love to just switch over to you for a minute. And, you know, being TripAdvisor, you have this fantastic opportunity to look and see what, you know, consumers and travelers are talking about on the chats. So tell us what is the sentiment globally and how that differs between different areas.
Yeah, I mean, we've been running research really since the start of COVID, looking at the impact. And nothing surprising, I think we all know this in our heart of hearts, is that travel is very resilient. And I think the more we're in lockdown, the more we're determined to travel. Our recent numbers, you know, look at about 68% say that even when they're in lockdown, they're thinking and dreaming about travel and where they're planning to go. And we see that consistently across the forum questions. If we look at our forum topics, for example, across different regions, APAC, we could really see the spike in early February where the topic of COVID dominated the forum discussions. Little bit of a spike in March, but really it's been tapering down. What the questions are more on is we had someone who asked a question of, in June, I want to go on holiday with my family to Thailand. What are your recommendations? Asking for facts like, do I need to be in quarantine? This is something we can touch on a little bit later. But essentially what consumers want to do is travel. What they're lacking is information. And I think that's true if we look at it anecdotally ourselves. So the good news is, you know, over 68% are wanting to travel. And he said domestic is massive. Everyone is looking at, you know, traveling within the next 3 to 6 months domestically. We've also seen, if you've heard the news about Australia and New Zealand thinking about building out the Tasman bubble because they both feel that they've gotten a handle on COVID and Fiji wants to be part of that. The question, and again on a broader subject for governments, will be whether or not those travel bubbles could exist beyond that. Would it include Hong Kong, for example, because we've also had about 28 days with no new cases. So is bubble going to be a way forward? But certainly domestic is a key. What we've launched in Singapore is a program called Love Your Local, where it's got twofold. The first fold is to get domestic audience to support local travel businesses. Right now, if you live in Singapore, Hermione would know this best, you literally can't go out. It's a circuit breaker. So very reliant on food delivery and anything else that can be delivered. And so we've featured a lot of sort of restaurants that are delivering traditionally they may not have done. As destinations start to shift, that program of Love Your Local will also start to shift. We'll start to include, for example, walks and parks that are opening up. Is there a way for you to do a cooking class with a local tour operator because you're really trying to support the local travel business? At the same time, we've launched Roam from Home, which is to get, you know, the world is your captive audience right now. They are looking for information. What can I do? I've suddenly turned into a bit of a baker for no reason. And it's because I'm endlessly watching videos on the delicious foods that you can make. And so it's the same principle. We've seen that travelers are showing that intent to search and they're looking at travel programs and cookery programs because they are dreaming about travel. So for someone like Sri Lanka, they should be showcasing things that you can do as a POV or a 360 to a global audience, both domestically and internationally, just to get people dreaming about the destination. Yeah.
Keeping Sri Lanka keeping Sri Lanka top of mind in this moment.
Absolutely.
And I think you've both just really nailed on that point about pent-up demand. So, you know, that first opportunity is really around that domestic opportunity. And I might just jump to Dileep now and just, you know, from your perspective, Dileep, on the ground, what is the state of play in Sri Lanka currently, re travel resumption? And specifically, can you tell us about Cinnamon Hotels and Resorts, priorities and plans for domestic to start off with?
Yeah, thank you, Katherine. So, I mean, great to be here through the initiative. I think we all worked out after the April, the deadly attacks, and we never thought that we should actually have to speak for another crisis, but that's the way tourism goes. So, looking at what we are going through now, our priority is basically to ensure that the hotel is actually ready for the post-COVID safety standards. That's the main challenge. And there are guidelines that are issued by the health authority. There are international guidelines. There are experts within our group itself. We have developed our own guidelines. So to ensure from the arrival to departure and also the employees, the safety and the operation guidelines are in place. Now, this is a new drill. It's not going to be easy one as well, because there are so many protocols to be protected. And sometimes it's you're dealing with clients. We have to open up certain restaurants, the liquor consumptions, they can go in various ways. So every scenario needs to be looked at it. And we need to ensure that, you know, we are actually top of the game. So that's the first thing that we are focusing on, the readiness of our hotels to receive the clients, whether it's domestic or international, to be the same standard. The second one is the most eminent segment. That's going to be the domestic traveler, because our airport is still not receiving arrivals to the country. The airport is open, but not receiving arrivals. So therefore, we need to focus on this particular clientele. So in that context, we are currently looking at the F&B operation city, which is opened a few days ago, which is closed for about 2.5 months, the delivery service. And then also we are going to look at the banquets. So very happy to see the first weddings coming up early as next week based on the new guidelines. So we are working on that too. 2 weddings will take place next week with the health ministry guidelines that have been put forward. And also some of the rooms reservations coming in, as well as the F&B operation. That's going to be our priority at the moment.
So yeah, so with that, so with the F&B stuff, you've what's happened to the buffet? Because there were a lot of questions last time about how do you deal with the buffet situation, because this is something that's very well known in Sri Lanka, and how does it work with pools and things like that? Let's get some details from you, would be great.
Yeah, so I don't think no hotels will planning to operate that big buffet, because the health risk on that is quite high on that. So we can actually work on a basis that the buffet is brought to your table. For example, if there are no long guests, they will have a dedicated table and they would actually be served there, or they can grab and go as a result. So those are 2 things that we are working on. And the pool is concerned that, obviously we can't have everyone there. There'll be restricted timing. That means you need to book your time. Everyone will be given based on the occupancy. Obviously, we can't have 100% occupancy, and we will not have clients also. But when you have run initially 20-30% occupancy, you can actually afford to do that. Everyone will have that distancing part of it. So those are the 2 main things that we are looking at it. And there are other protocols from the time of arrival, disinfection of the bags, how you do the room service, turnaround service. So all these actually been worked out currently. And I mean, luckily these guidelines also available on the internet now a lot.
Yes, for everybody. And domestic segment wise, who do you think are going to be the first ones to return to travel in terms of for Sri Lankan, for our businesses that are listening and thinking, who do we need to target? What's Cinnamon thinking?
We did a small research to understand, what would be the most open, or at least a segment that could be actually interested in traveling. Number 1, we thought is actually more millennials. We're looking at, the younger gen between 25 to 45 age group, and they actually want to go and work and at least be there. So there's another segment emerging, is that because of the schools are closed at the moment. So the weekdays also can be actually a traveling date for people. And also the fact that there are various working from home concept. So when you provide enough bandwidth, etc., they don't actually mind going for a holiday while they work. Plus the family also can actually stay around. So those are some of the new segments, and we're also looking at very closely some areas that we can work on, especially on the wellness area, where people could actually not turning entire hotel into wellness, but there are certain experiences people want to have it. And so we are working on those packages. So we are going into like a more micro segmentation, understanding what they need, and try and actually where locals and foreigners are concerned. So just to focus a little bit more on that. And also we not necessarily on a discounter strategy, but a more value addition strategy.
So that's a good one. So are you also looking at some vouchers? I've seen a lot of people talking about vouchers, you know, buy now or pay now for a future. Is that something that you're looking at?
Yeah, the market has, shown some results on it, advanced voucher system. So you buy now and pay later or go later. So that's something we are also introducing, and also flexi check-in, check-out process, because when you run, you know, you can check in anytime, check out anytime. So that's, you know, 24-hour check-in, check-out time. So that actually gives a lot of flexibility. The consumer should get that flexibility that they are looking for easily at this point, so that, you know, we can actually meet their expectations.
That's great. And I think your program, you've renamed it, or I don't know if it was always called that, Cinnamon Care. Has that always been your brand positioning, or is that something new you've put up around your...
No, Cinnamon Care was part of a DNA, but then we brought it out. It's very important people actually understand that. So what we are looking at, it can be high tech, but we don't want to be, not necessarily be out of touch. So we don't call it high touch, but at least a personal touch. So high tech and personal touch actually is the representation of Cinnamon Care. So we need to make sure that, you know, we care about all these people at every aspect of it. So Cinnamon Care is the quality symbol and assurance of safety as well as the care. So the safety only doesn't make sense, but the care has to come in as well.
So this is a great idea for people that are listening. So, you know, how do you create a message around your, you know, protocols, your process, etc. So a great tip for others that are listening. Niranka, can I just get you to jump in now? And, you know, what would you say based on your clients that you have? What have you been advising them in terms of digital priorities at the moment in getting ready for the domestic market, given budgets are a bit tight?
Understood. So actually, echoing Dileep's sentiments, we're starting to see a pickup across the board. So we did a review of close to about 70 hotels and looked at how the domestic market is starting to perform. So even during COVID, there was maybe a smattering of bookings, people hoping for a brighter day around the corner kind of thing, but there is definitely a steady acceleration we can see now post the 11th of May, and we are expecting that to continuously climb as well. So all things told, the average lead time is a little in advance, right? So we're seeing 30 to 45 days sort of thing. And in my opinion, I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the Sri Lankan hospitality industry to actually market to locals. I believe more often than not, we play around the price sensitivity. So it's sort of like a, 50% off the full board rate, and that becomes a primary driver to bring in that occupancy. But we could really start looking at marketing and having an effective strategy for the local market. Every month we can look at people who are celebrating their anniversaries and introduce romance packages for Sri Lankan travelers. So I think there is a lot of opportunity for us to go beyond the discounting aspect and really look at a segmented approach to the local market as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So in terms of what you could do right now, I think it's quite important to talk about this. So if you haven't done it already, you should make sure all your local offers are published and available online. Your reservation teams are briefed, the numbers are published, your Facebook stories and ads are going out, and the basics really do need to be in place now because the booking cycle is starting to pick up.
Yeah, so a 30 to 45 day lead time already on domestics, which is great. So that's good. And I think special occasion, as you mentioned, is a good opportunity. Thank you, Niranka. We might now switch into our international profile and our discussion around that. And Hermione, could you just give us a bit of an overview again on the Google research in terms of what you're seeing with international traveller sentiment for travelling to different markets?
Sure. If I may, would I just be able to comment on the conversations that just was had?
Yeah, please. Go for it.
The only thing that I would just add to everyone and say is that I agree with everyone's comment around domestic travel. And I think there's been this big shift to digital across the board because of COVID, and even look at the way we're engaging. And everyone else is much more comfortable with digital. So I think brands really need to think about how they communicate on the digital platforms, and how that most of their communication is probably coming through a mobile device now, and how that appears. And that also to start getting a little bit scrappier with content. I don't think the user now expects cinema quality in terms of advertising. They're very comfortable with scrappy advertising. So anything that you can do, given budgets are tight, anything that you can do that would celebrate your hotel or your brand, and be scrappy about it, even creating, you know, your own YouTube videos and stories, and telling people about your hotel to bring them in, would be really helpful. And I also agree that it's incredibly important to have all your rates up to date online, because this is the first place people will be going and investigating, making sure that you have all your photos there ready to go on TripAdvisor or any other OTA, or in our hotel ads units. But people are dreaming. There is pent up demand, but it's all about how you get the most out of that demand right now, while people are wanting to connect with brands and dream, and how you take them on that journey. And really, I think, you know, what the Cinnamon Group is doing is fantastic in terms of how they're educating their consumers around hygiene and the process. And I think people want to know more, because there is that little bit of nervousness. But to come back to your original question, I just couldn't help but say, to just take the opportunity.
No, that's perfect. Jump on in. It's great.
But coming back to your question around international travel, I think, again, I answered a little bit, I think, before jumping ahead. So sorry about that. But I think that, you know, most people are focused on domestic travel right now. And when they will travel internationally, they'll be focusing on what we call green shoots. So the bubbles that Sarah mentioned, where governments have agreed to travel arrangements, and there won't be any forced what's it called? There won't be any forced like confinement around the travel. So we see green shoots opening up, say in the Baltics. We believe a green shoot will open up around and a bubble around France, Italy, and Spain. You mentioned, I think it was you, the Tasman, or Sarah, I think, the Tasman Alliance that might be coming. I'm hopeful it includes Singapore too. But I think as you think about and work with your government, you also want to create your own green shoots. We've seen China come out and say that they're looking, just last night they came out and said that they're looking to activate with a number of different nations such as Singapore, specific green shoots as a test just for high level travel, business travel. But I think what we're seeing is, if you had to break it down, if there was to be international, and to summarize, beyond the shoots and the bubbles, if there was international travel to come, it will come from intra-APAC. APAC seems to have a different sentiment, and it's possibly because we started with COVID first around travel, and that APAC customers are most likely to travel internationally first. But again, you need to break that down, and so should your messaging. It's really important that you have specific messaging for your customers in each market. Your messaging to India would be different to Australia or Japan, and the appetite is different as well. So again, Southeast Asia seems to have, the consumers in Southeast Asia to have a higher propensity, they seem to willingness to travel sooner than, say, Australians or Japanese who would prefer to travel domestically for longer.
That's fantastic. Okay, thank you so much. Sarah, can you take us through some of the kind of insights you're seeing at the moment in terms of some of the consumer sentiment that's around internationally specifically?
I think probably what Hermione was saying, very similar stats that we're seeing at TripAdvisor. I think there's a few things. What we're seeing is that travelers are looking for good. They're looking for information. I think there's concern on sort of sites where there's different types of news. They're trying to really stay focused when they're searching for travel. They want to feel like they're in a safe environment, not a huge amount of negative news. And so certainly, you know, like a pure travel platform really makes sense right now, because they can search, find out accurate information, be able to ask other travelers their advice. Very similar stat to Hermione is we've seen that 49% are more likely to feel comfortable staying at a hotel. One of the things that, as I mentioned earlier, there is a massive appetite to travel, but there is a sense of fear, more often than not from getting ill, but from the fact that one doesn't know what could change. You know, I've got a friend who unfortunately had to have an emergency trip, and she's now spent in total 2 weeks of quarantine here and 2 weeks of quarantine back home. So there's a government aspect that we have to manage, and I would advocate that Sri Lanka, the government needs to make some fast decisions about where they want to create these travel bubbles. What will their policy be? And it's great to see Cinnamon having a very strong policy, but that also needs to be across the entire country, from head to toe of every aspect of travel. What will be the policy at the airport? When I land, what process will I need to go through? When I get into taxis, what's that process? I suppose in a way, I'm quite lucky being in Hong Kong. We're a city that experienced SARS. And as such, we've put down a sort of plan when we had SARS as to what everyone needs to do. So our restaurants, our hotels, our buses, even the community all has a particular duty. And that's what travelers will be looking for, especially if you're targeting Asia travelers who, if they've been through SARS, will know, well, my building is disinfected every hour on the hour. Every doorknob that I touch has been disinfected the last hour. Restaurants, weddings, for example, we've been running weddings in Hong Kong since February. It's the first time you can have a wedding banquet as a takeaway. I can imagine the chef losing his mind trying to pack 300 boxes. But I think that is critical from both a business point of view, but also from a messaging. What consumers are looking for is reassurance. So we know that Sri Lanka is fabulous. I'm always on the lookout for a little holiday home. That's how much I love Sri Lanka. But what will be critical is the entire journey that a traveler takes in Sri Lanka. Is everybody covered? If I'm doing a safari, you know, in the national parks, what's the policy there? Is there one? And is it the same for everyone? The idea is not to have each business coming up with their own policy, but to have a nation standardized policy, because that's what's going to give the travelers reassurance. A simple view right now is if you look at trying to fly, the information coming out from the airlines is confusing. You don't know, do you need to buy the middle seat? Do I sit on the left seat? Do I need to mask up or not mask up? Will I need to buy a hat? There are so many unknowns right now. And that's, to be fair, this is something, you know, when I hear a lot of people going, well, it's a little bit like SARS, a little bit like it's a pandemic. We haven't had one for 100 years. There's not a true comparison. There are lessons that we can learn. So I think that's my messaging, because it serves a duality. It serves the marketing messaging, which is what travelers are looking for, is that confidence. Come to Sri Lanka. We're ready for you because nationally we're doing this. And secondly, once your travelers land, whether it's domestic or international, that's what they're going to be looking for. The sense of safety. Oh, you're on mute, Katherine.
Thanks, Sarah. You make a really good point on that. Who's on? Can anybody hear that? I'll just mute that one. Sorry about that. So Dileep, can we hear from you?
Yeah.
Is everyone else hearing that? background. I think it's Dileep, so I'm just going to mute him again. Niranka, can we go to you for a second? And can you just run us through a little bit of the insights that you're seeing at the moment in Sri Lanka in terms of international booking behaviour and search behaviour, specifically on Sri Lanka? I'll share my screen if I can to see if that works. And can everybody see that? We'll just put it up as a full screen. Yeah? Niranka, can you go through that?
Thank you. Yeah, so basically, I think where Sri Lanka is unique in this whole comparisons and proposition is that in the same financial year, we are facing two unprecedented situations. So to really gauge demand and to really quantify the patterns that we see in this demand, what we did was we looked at search behavior. Now, irrespective of where a potential guest books, which channel they use, as with the travel agent or brand website, it's a safe enough assumption that a majority of them would go online at some point and possibly search for some information. So we collated 3,900 plus search terms to understand all related to tourism in Sri Lanka, to kind of understand if there is a fluctuation and what does that fluctuation look like. So 2018 stands out as essentially a golden benchmark. And from 2019, post Easter Sunday, we started to see a drop. That, I think the graph overall is a curve, negative curve right now, but I also believe that it's a wave. We are at the bottom of the curve right now, but we'll start coming up later on. So immediately after Easter Sunday, demand dropped by close to 70%. Overall, year-on-year demand for 2019 was down 18%. But now with COVID-19, we are back at a 70+ growth. So I think while at the moment we are at the bottom of the curve, there is potential for it to pick up. And looking at the statistics for May, definitely interest is starting to ramp up.
Great. Can you just take us through the next one, please, Niranka? So travel intent, what have we got here?
Sure. So basically, travel, again, using search terms, you can quantify the intent behind travel. You can try and understand why would they want to come to Sri Lanka, what exactly are they looking for. And I think it's a pretty important analysis here where you could clearly see that different types of travel have been impacted in different ways. So across the board, for this study, we looked at UK, India, and Australia for now. And across these three markets, we can see that honeymoon and romance-based travel has suffered the least. So just to offer a bit more context here, everything is down. But honeymoon-related travel, romance-related travel as a segment seems to be the least impacted. So what this means is that this is an area that will potentially recover a little faster, and where international guests would want to come to Sri Lanka. So UK, India, Australia, both all three markets, average drop is about 72%. When you look at each of the different segments in the screen shared, you could actually see that types of travel vary by country of origin as well. So luxury travel seems to be the least impacted segment from the UK, but seems to be the most, one of the most impacted areas from Australia. So I would say overall the biggest category drop is in safari and beach, while each market has its variations. So based on your property, based on your value proposition, this understanding might be quite important when you are considering your source market strategy.
Great. And I think you've been looking at data up to what period for this? Up to just...
this is up to May 2020.
Perfect. So we've got some really live data on that. So that's a really interesting slide and insight into, yep, we know everything's down because everything is down everywhere, but relatively speaking, the sorts of experiences that are less down in terms of family and luxury for some markets and overall honeymoon is a great outtake for everybody. Can you talk? Yes,
Katherine,
please.
Just add just one comment or two comments
Please.
on that. Because I also saw a question come up. There's also what we're seeing in the markets that still have the restrictions. So like Singapore, we can barely go outside, but we will move into phase 2 soon. And someone mentioned Colombo, you can't move around. There is a demand for staycations and thinking about how you market the staycations. I know that in Hong Kong, there was a huge uptick for staycations when...
So what's your definition of staycation, just for the listeners, so they understand what you mean by staycation?
It's basically, well, I think Niranka mentioned it, or Dileep, but millennials in particular love to do a staycation. And it's where you live in the same place, but you go and stay at a hotel and you feel like you're away from home, or you are away from home, but you're not actually having to travel very far. At least in Singapore, you don't travel very far, but maybe in Colombo, you travel a little bit further. But it gives you an experience that is not your day-to-day experience. And usually the customer will spend 24 to 48 hours just in that hotel. They'll eat there, they'll sleep there, they'll drink there, and they have this experience. And that's our definition of staycations. Usually it's couples, but it could be friends. Usually probably more romantic, but also like I have friends who do staycations with families just to get away, a change of scenery, and people will do that as Singapore opens up, for sure. That will be like the first step to travel. But the other thing is that what we've noticed from all the data, and you can see this by the trends, is like people have a strong preference when they want to travel now to be with nature and be in nature spots. And that's quite a big interest for people. So they would prefer to get out of the cities. And I think because of the way COVID has spread, that has also resulted in people's desire. So it's less about a city experience and more about a nature experience. So if you have that available or something similar, then it's great to push that with your customers.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Just gonna
Sarah.
jump in there as well, just to say that absolutely, staycations are weekend breaks, or normally they're weekend breaks if you're working, but staycations are durable. I think for Sri Lanka, it's more durable. I think places like Australia, absolutely. Singapore, because you've got Sentosa, there's that option. Certain cities are going to struggle with it. Hong Kong is one that it's going to be very price driven, because we're not far from any hotel. It takes me 10 minutes to get to one. The question will be, what is enticing about that? What has been really interesting, as Hermione mentioned, is the idea of avoiding crowds. So if you're an operator that's always focused on group rather than FIT, now is the time to sort of think about a shift in your business, because that is going to take some time to come back. Drive is of particular interest for the bigger destinations, because again, you can rent a car, it's your family, you know the people in the car, or it's your own car, and you minimize the risk. Nature and wellness are huge. Hiking, outdoor activities. Even in Hong Kong, we've seen just during the last few months, we've not had any lockdown in this city, but every weekend, we've noticed there's a spike in people going out to outdoor parks and activities, even in a city. So my recommendation for domestic and international is to really focus on sort of like the tea trails, the beaches, the routes. Beaches, keeping in mind, if it's going to be overwhelmed by people, you will in fact turn people off. So that's something to also manage, is how do you manage each of these areas. So,
and I think I think a place like Sri Lanka provides an amazing opportunity for regional dispersal. So there's some amazing
absolutely, that
gems
regional is really critical. It's harder for cities. It really is harder. But if you live in Colombo, you can pop to Gaul very, very quickly. So I think it's things like that that we need to. It's always telling the domestic audiences is that you've lived in this place for so many years, you've never discovered your backyard, right? It's an opportunity for them to do that. But the great thing is it's not wasted effort, because the international audience is looking for pretty much the same thing.
Well, this is it. So I think the learnings that we can trial on our domestic audiences and that Sri Lanka can focus on there is really, again, a consumer sentiment that will roll out for the internationals. So
and as I said, just don't forget that you've got this global audience that is just global and domestic, that is just sitting there and just consuming nothing but online content. You know, if you are doing cooking classes or a great Ayurvedic yoga session, you know, share that, because it gets people just focusing on your destination. And it's a great way to move that conversation and engage that audience, which is critical.
Fantastic. I totally agree. Thank you, Sarah. Niranka, can you just share with us the next slide, which I think is a really interesting one for our audience to be looking at booking demand for Sri Lanka at the moment. And I love that you did this up to yesterday nearly, or you know, a few days ago. So I know your team have been working on this to give us some real-time data. So please take us through what this is.
Sure. So basically how we collect this data is we look at online searches conducted on brand booking sites. So we take the check-in, check-out dates, the country of origin, etc., to understand, obviously, from a perspective of volume, but also to understand potential dates of stay. So
let me just clarify that for people. So basically what we're looking at here is a conglomeration of Sri Lankan hotel sites, and then the search behavior when someone's jumping in to go, I would like to go here, and it's international audience profiling.
Yes, so it's outside of Sri Lanka, and rate searches conducted on brand websites put together to understand overall trend.
So the top 5 markets that are looking at the moment in terms of total booking volume are?
Yes, so in terms of an absolute number, again, everything is down. But if you take the data, so 13th March, why we've selected that as a start date, is that's the date the airport closed in Sri Lanka, and from 13th March, 25th May, when we looked at who is on hotel websites, brand hotel websites, who's consuming data, who's actually conducting rate searches. So the top 5 markets are US, UK, Australia, India, and France. And the growth markets, so now this is, I think, quite important to understand in context. So the overall pie has actually shrunk. That is, overall demand obviously has dropped due to COVID-19, but in consideration of market share, when you consider the market share of countries, you actually notice that from that remaining interest, the market share seems to have redistributed among some countries as such. So, for example, the US has steadily grown for Sri Lankan brands from 2017 onwards. And the representative sample size, even in 2020 up to May, it has been growing at a significantly higher rate in the context of market share. So other countries like Malaysia, Belgium, and Poland. Poland is something we've been monitoring as a source market from Easter Sunday last year, April. And the market share contribution from Poland for Sri Lankan brands has been steadily increasing. So I think it's a fantastic market to keep an eye on.
Interesting, really interesting. I might throw to Dileep now just to comment on these stats and tell us from your perspective, what are you seeing in terms of international market priorities? China obviously is not there at the moment, which is interesting given how significant it is as a market. What are your thoughts, Dileep?
I think it's a little too early for us to understand how the market behavior is, because there are so many dynamics. There are many variables that can actually impact the outcome. But if you look at globally more promising markets, obviously China is going to be a great potential for us, because they are ready to go and their control situation is more controlled based on the protocols. But the rest of the markets will not depend on their processes and the regulations which they're going to put it. And more important, not to forget the airline factor. Before COVID, we had about almost 65 to 70 flights coming to Sri Lanka daily basis. So how much of those flights will get affected needs to be looked at it, and that will have a major impact also to us. So we don't really know that is, but we know Sri Lankan Airlines is going to fly to some of the destinations. But looking at China, maybe the next Australia, if they open up, and of course Indian situation, maybe South India to some extent. Israel, which has shown a very promising, they've got a corridor between Israel and Seychelles, because Sri Lanka goes to Seychelles. Those are some of the markets that I think we can look at it, but I think it's a little too early for us to put our bets at the moment.
Absolutely. And what about a Sri Lanka bubble? What's the thought around the bubble, around a Sri Lankan bubble?
I think I think if the bubble has to be created, I believe it's between Sri Lanka and China. And that's because there's political ties are so high. And there is, of course, one thing good, that we never got a single COVID case came, even though receiving the first Chinese national, we never got that. So there seems to be more control and discipline in terms of traveling segments. So it's going to be waiting to look at if that the protocol can be worked out. And of course, India, when things improve, the proximity of the traveling is going to be something we need to look at it. So with these two, I think we should, and the rest of the markets, we'll have to wait again and see with the airline connectivity.
Yeah, I think that's actually a wonderful point to clarify. So what we're looking at is actually live data on what the interest level looks like now. But if tomorrow there is a restriction that comes saying most of the airline routes are cancelled, or if Sri Lanka introduces a travel ban from a particular country, then we are going to see this flip immediately. So I think it's important, based on this data, you shouldn't really make an absolute judgment right now.
No, I think all data at the moment, I think the point about data, whether it's any of our data that we're looking at, we're in unknown territory. This is early data. We're just trying to use it as a basis for people to look at their businesses and think differently. But I think it's just one of those inputs that we should look at. Dileep, can I just...
Sorry, I'd also just say that also the data is constantly changing, and I've seen some of the comments come up in terms of saying, like the government's changed its decision, and I think that's why it's really important for the people listening to this to keep across the data, because you can have massive swings. Like just this week, Japan decided to open up out of state of emergency with no pre-warning, and so keeping across the data. And we have reports that are free, such as Google Mobility, which will show you how much people are moving within a market or a city, or Google Trends that you can use that will help you give you an idea of what is trending and how consumers are changing. So I just think it's an unknown period. No one knows. I mean, if I could tell you what, as one of my analysts said, if I could tell you what was going to happen in 6 months' time, I'd be a very rich person. But keeping abreast of it and keeping up to date so you can capitalize on it is really important. And monitoring stressful and exhausting time, but that's especially for the businesses on this call, but that's a great use of some of that angst energy to have a plan about how you're going to keep yourself up to date so you can change and adapt and message accordingly in the downtime, or get some of your staff to help you do it.
I was actually going to just add on really quickly that one of the things that destinations and governments should have already been doing, if they haven't, they need to be doing, is they need to be doing an audit. Because one of the critical things will be who's going to be flying, right? And what we already have seen airlines already fall to the wayside. So it's not just about airlines that will survive. They may not open that route. So it's all very well looking at sort of which markets. You also want to not get into a situation where a lot of destinations did in the past, which was stick to one market goes. You're also then both having it's not a good consumer journey, and it's also a challenge if there's anything that happens to that market. So there's quite a lot of sort of research that needs to be done. And then on top of that, each business themselves should have a sort of a phased recovery and being able to shift really quickly. So keeping on top of the data, but also looking at, you know, opportunities where you can try and run something very quickly. And that's being really agile. But I would say keep an eye on the airlines and routes, governments, of course, because
which is a good,
yeah,
I think this is a really good point. So I think this whole aviation capacity thing is fundamental to any success of any market opportunity. Dileep, can I just, you know, you wear a couple of hats. You're the Cinnamon from Cinnamon Hotels and Resorts, but also on the board of the Sri Lankan Tourism Promotions Bureau. So can you give us a bit of an update? I know that the guidelines have been released in terms of COVID guidelines for reopening. What's happening in the consumer demand generation space in terms of discussions around marketing campaigns and obviously aviation discussions as well?
Yeah, I think I can't represent Promotion Bureau, but I'll just speak to you from an industry perspective on what we are privy to in terms of information. I think there's a lot of good work has happened. So if I just summarize very quickly for the information, the first one is I think we were craving about a destination marketing campaign. So the destination marketing campaign that was not, we couldn't actually stake off the ground, has now been approved, which we know there's all news by the cabinet. So that work is actually continuing, and to make sure that we have a robust and a sustainable campaign, and we see the early signs of it coming through, and the infrastructure required for it, and the processors and the procurements all happening there. So I think that's a very good thing. Second thing is some of the work that needs to be do with the national carrier, Sri Lankan Airlines, the joint promotions that are being planned is going to be another element that will be a quick win, because there are people looking for direct carrier to go from city to city. They may not be very comfortable getting off on another airport and come back. So whatever airports which Sri Lanka is going to serve, especially China, they have a very good connection. I think that joint campaigns would be really something really good. The other one is, of course, for the COVID certification program, which we all know. And so that will be basically in operation, so that hotels will get to know about it. The fourth one is the research, the destination research that needs to take off, the domestic research that going to be launched in Sri Lanka. So that will be basically just to understand the nuances, the barriers, and the expectations and the hesitations of the domestic carrier. That's will be launched out very, very quickly, so that the people in the business can actually articulate and actually create their products and services based on that. The second one, of course, the global research that's going to take place. The fifth one is the local quick PR wins that needs to be done. Just to make sure that, as Sarah very correctly mentioned, the gap of telling people what's going to happen, that needs to be professionally created, so the press releases, etc. So that being worked out currently. So those are some of the very proactive initiatives done. I think for the people who are listening, the Promotion Bureau, the tourism consists of public and private sector partnership. So we give full support to the Promotion Bureau and the other institutions to execute that program of work.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I think that's good for our listeners to be able to hear some of those campaigns and activities that are actually starting to happen. So I think they're really important. Before I open up I've got a couple of questions from the listeners, which I really think will be great to share. I wanted to just get your last comments about if there was one thing that you think our audience should be thinking of at the moment with their businesses based on the data that you see every day in your businesses. What would your advice be to them? So I might start with Niranka, if that's all right. What would be your piece of advice that you would give to our audience?
talk about all the things that you're doing. So if you are going to introduce safety protocols and all of that, ensure that it's very visible publicly. If you're launching offers, make sure it's visible for everybody. And one direct observation we have from the post aftermath of Easter Sunday is that the level of personalization people preferring to use in chat and inquiry forms to actually ask all the questions that they have and convert afterwards, the percentages started just rising and rising. So I think a touch of personalization and making sure that your brand is accessible and somebody could build an affinity with you, talk to you, and clarify everything is going to become increasingly important.
Great, thank you for that. So you actually saw post the Easter attacks with clients that those clients that for better booking conversion, those clients that had you know, a chat or an opportunity to ask questions or to engage further with the process rather than just, you know, they had a lift up.
Yes, direct check-in, check-out and credit card payment percentage started to drop. And those who would send out inquiries, ask a whole bunch of questions, and convert through reservation channels.
Makes sense, doesn't it? Because I mean, you've got a customer that needs more assurance. So I think that's a really good point. Thank you. Sarah, what would you say? TripAdvisor.
I'll end with a stat. 81% of respondents say how a brand responds to a crisis will have a huge impact on their likelihood to buy that brand. It's never changed, it's the same now. Engage with your consumers. What they want is to be spoken to. They want clarity, they want information. There's huge amounts of data out there. Of course there is. You need to do the research, but you need to talk to your consumers. And I think that's critical. And you need to be very flexible at this stage. What is the new normal? That no one knows, and it will keep being the new normal until that normal becomes established. So don't look at the past and assume that's how it's going to be. Be flexible.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. That's great. Hermione.
I'd just say that offer flexibility, think about your pricing and make sure you have really targeted messaging. Because the domestic consumer is going to have different needs to the Australian consumer, to the Japanese consumer, to the Indian consumer.
So tailor your messaging based on who you're speaking to. Great. And flexibility, it's such a good point at the moment. It keeps coming up everywhere. Consumers are not going to travel and book unless they know there's a flexible sort of option for them based on their risk.
I'm the perfect example. I'm dying to get on the next flight, and I'm booking holidays for overseas for the end of September, banking on that we open up. But I want flexibility, otherwise I'm not going to make it.
Great, thank you so much, Niranka.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think one thing that's quite interesting with the rate searches and the average lead times in Sri Lanka, most of the booking intent is towards later this year. So December, October, November, December, January, that's where the peak is in interest as well. So
I was just going to see if I could share a slide on that, because I don't think we got to that one before. This is a really cool slide. Yeah, so is that about booking intention?
Yes, so you could see the highest percentage is for August, so that's rate searches being done from the 1st to 25th of May. In August, there is a spike, the airport is opening up. These are all outside of Sri Lanka, and you could see the interest picking up again in December, Jan. So I think it's important to realize some of the things that you do now may not really give you a dividend right now, but are going to be part of, I think, an overall plan, or should be rather part of an overall plan for recovery when things start to normalize a bit more.
It's really interesting, that graph, because you're looking at very even, you know, if people 17% looking at for travel in August, 12% in September, 13% in October, 10% in November, and 15% in December. So there is quite a spread on that. So we'll make sure we share that slide as well on the Sri Lankan Tourism Alliance website post this chat as well. Thank you for that. Dileep, I'd like to finish with you in terms of, you've got some great things that Cinnamon Hotels and Resorts are doing at the moment. What would be the one thing you would say to all of our listeners around what they should be focused on at the moment?
I'll squeeze in two things. The most important thing is that every research has shown otherwise currently. So this is a human, we are dealing with a human behavior, which is very, very difficult to predict. Everyone said that cruise ships are not going to take place 40% up than the last year. Everyone said that, no one will go to beaches. You see the numbers and people are in most of the countries. One of the malls I saw in Australia, which actually just like Christmas, they said. So the airlines, which they started about 3 weeks back, didn't even have a social distancing. So it's very, very difficult to predict the human behavior. And it's unlike early instances, I'm not fully convinced still that the people will actually get on with the new norm. So I'm not yet to see that. And I believe old norm will come at certain point or later. That's one. Second thing is, this is a time we discussed about physical distancing, but not about brand distancing. So not to allow the brand to distance from your customer, keep on engaging. That's very easy that, you cut off budgets, etc. It's very expensive. Let's work on now. But the consumer admiration in terms of campaigns is going to be something that, based on facts, is a very, very easy win compared to the brand equity on other activities. So do something which is going to be very useful for the consumer and the others. So it's something consumer brand closeness to consumer admiration is something which we have learned across the globe. Case studies, Pret a Manger in Europe food chain.
That is such a good one to finish on. It really is an important point for us in terms of don't distance away from your customers at the moment, even if you don't have any tangible product to sell them right at this moment. This is the time to be leaning into them and connecting to them. And I'm seeing some great examples of that with experiences. You don't have to be a big brand to be doing this. You can be an amazing, small, nature-based experience in a regional area, and it's around how you use social media to connect with your customers or your databases to continue to keep yourselves top of mind and be engaging. So I think it's an awesome point there, Dileep. Thank you. I might ask Malik to join us again now for question time, if that's okay, Malik. Excellent. And
Katherine, I'm terribly
yes,
sorry,
please.
but I have another meeting that I have to go to.
No worries.
I'm so sorry. I had buffered the hour, but
We've run over a little bit. That's completely fine. Thank you so much for joining us. And if we have any specific questions for you, we'll go offline and get them and share them on our social channels.
That's no problem. I'm more than happy. Thank you very much, everyone, for the time.
Thank you, Hermione.
Bye-bye.
Book your next holiday to Sri Lanka, please.
I can't wait.
Bye.
See you in Sri Lanka. Bye.
Thank you. So we might just go to some of the audience questions that we've had, and we've had a couple of really good ones that I think would be interesting. The first one that I have here is, what advice do you have for SMEs in Sri Lanka with regard to continuing to target their customer base that they currently have, or should they be considering casting the net wider for when they open? Anyone's welcome to answer that. Dileep.
Yeah, I think it's a pertinent question. Comes in SME, whether they can actually set standards, like the other big properties, etc. But I think what is coming up is that in favor of it, it's true that SMEs may have a challenge in proving that they are more post-COVID friendly in terms of sanitation and safety. But on the other hand, which actually coming out very strongly, is that people also have developed this connotation of care, and they are mindful and care, and people are becoming a little more better than before, maybe just to understand the human interaction, etc. So in that context, some of the people who are traveling also understood the importance of being caring, and their responsibility of traveling as well. So in that context, SMEs can still be valid, but of course the basic sanitations and safety assurance needs to be given. And it's not very, very difficult to do. I think some of these things can be done easily. They have to actually change the mindset also. and also make sure that your experiences that you continue to give, what you used to give has to be given, and continue that.
Fantastic. I like that. That's a really good point. Thank you so much. Niranka, were you going to say something, or Sarah, around that?
Yeah, so from an SME perspective, I strongly believe that there is so many things that you could do that don't really require a budget as such, and building your databases is actually a fantastic time to concentrate on that right now. So a lot of people may not be ready to book right now, and frankly, as everybody weighed in, we really don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, what flight is going to be opened, or what country is going to allow travel. So I think there is a great opportunity to introduce a first touch point of just engaging with the brand. So focusing on your social media content, focusing on your website content, basically offering channels of engagement to drive a conversation is basically very low cost stuff that practically everybody can do. So I think SMEs, especially in the context of marketing budgets, do have quite a few options of things that they could be doing right now.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to say exactly the same. I think it's really critical that it doesn't matter if you're an SME or a big business, you need to manage your online profile right now. You need to manage it effectively. Content is really king and remains so. The right content is also critical. Some examples I can share. In Kenya, the tourism board is actually paying safari guides to keep their jobs. But what they've asked them to do is take their cameras, GoPros, and go out there and film what a guide would look like. So experiencing nature without other humans. And they're sharing that content on TripAdvisor, on our social channels. They're also sharing it on their own channels. So the government, in that case, are supporting the small businesses to keep them afloat. You can do that yourself anyways, even if government may not be able to support you. If you are a safari guide, or you have a huge amount of historical experience on Sigiriya, why not tell us what it's like? Why not do a tour? If you're great at cooking, do a cooking class. If you know how to sing, do that. I mean, there's just a myriad of things that you can do. And it's a great opportunity. As I said, you have the world's most captive audience right now. And they're online. They are spending more time online than anywhere else. So yeah, maintain your online profile.
Excellent. Thank you. Dileep, I have a question that's come in that I'd love you to have a go at. I know you're good with stats, and if you don't know it, it's okay. No one will be blaming you. But the domestic market, someone's asked, how big is the domestic tourism market in Sri Lanka? So it's a really important and valuable question. Do you have a size of the market?
Yeah, so the domestic market, if you look at the accommodation-based market, I'm not talking about the rest of it. Theoretically, we looked at about 20% of our total. I mean, most hoteliers, they think about 20%. I'm looking about the 4- and 5-star category. So that's the size, because they were essentially a weekend market, not necessarily a weekday market. That's what our experience used to be. So if you look at from a 20% in terms of room nights that we're looking at, from our perspective, it was around easily about 6,000 to 7,000 room nights. Right, so it's maybe about 8,000. So that's okay. And then that's for one chain. So if you multiply by about another 10 or 12, you're looking about easily 100,000 room nights market. And if somebody asks whether that is enough to sustain, the answer is going to be no, because you can't. That's not going to be sufficient. But it's a very good base, and that is one of the limitations that Sri Lanka has. That unlike other like India or Spain or any other country, that our domestic market base is not huge enough to sustain on its own, not like China or any other country.
So that's very
okay, but still there's a base.
That's very similar to what we have in Hong Kong. Our domestic audience can't really sort of cope with just to upkeep the travel business. I mean, Singapore, what we've done there with Love Your Local is we've actually working with two groups. One is a gift card company, one is a charity. And again, it's twofold. We're asking locals, if they're going to buy someone a gift, buy them either a hotel gift card or a dinner voucher, so that you're supporting the industry. And then there's also a charitable arm that we're saying, you know, if people want to donate, they should do that. What we're trying to do in Singapore, and we're going to be replicating it across Asia Pacific, hopefully, is to try and get the local domestic audience to realize the impact of losing travel to their world. And it's critical, not just from jobs, but it's what makes life enjoyable. So we've actually done that. And that's something that I know you guys have got vouchers already, but something to consider is putting out a message. Love Sri Lanka, buy a gift card, buy a Sri Lankan gift card. Stay this weekend, discover Ella, but buy it as a gift card, invite your friends and do that. So there's different ways of doing it. I've got a friend who's going to be leaving Hong Kong. And so we're buying a hotel weekend because we can't go anywhere else. And I'm buying a spa program at the hotel. And we're having dinner out. Don't kill me, Dileep. But we want to be able to share the love between the hotels, the restaurants,
Absolutely.
whole vertical, so that we're able to really support as many of the businesses as we can. So it is actually encouraging people to do that.
Thank you for that, Sarah. We've actually had a specific question for you come in. Are TripAdvisor trying out new or different ways to keep guest feedback alive? Small hotels and restaurants aren't currently able to spend on marketing. How will Trip help these customers to market themselves?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any new programs right now. You probably will have seen that the site's just gone through a massive facelift. You'll notice we do that ever so, you know, quite often, because we're always about focusing on the consumer. The big focus we've got right now is the good out there. We really focus on what's good, both in terms of what's good for travel and then what's also good for the audience. In terms of driving and you're managing your online, there's paid versions, of course, but even the free version, you've got Review Express, which is absolutely free. You just basically, you can generate an email that TripAdvisor will fire out for you to your users to ask them to write a review to your property or your experience. That's absolutely free. Simple things. I went to a great show in Thailand, and all they did was at the end of the show, they dropped a banner that said, write a review on TripAdvisor. It doesn't have to be complicated or laborious. It's just saying, you know, it's a similar thing is make sure you tell people to tag themselves. So make sure your geo ID is always on. Then the most important thing is tell your audience, share it on Trip, share it on Facebook, share it on Instagram. That's critical. And it should be your, you know, your daily bread and butter in terms of how do you manage your online profile. Less Candy Crush, more of this will help.
Thank you. We've also had one more question that I think is really valuable, that says, is there a centralized place in Sri Lanka for all the guidelines, the airline, you know, updates, or the cleanliness guidelines, or, you know, all the bits and pieces that are going to, the national parks, the taxis, that would be gathered and accessible to everybody? It's a very good question. Dileep.
I think Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance should do that website.
I think so too. So I was waiting for either Malik or yourself to offer and say the Sri Lankan Tourism Alliance is going to step up and you guys are going to get onto this, because I think that's a really valuable thing that you guys could deliver.
Can I?
Oh, it's necessary.
Done.
I'm heading up the crisis task force for PATA. We have created a resource center that is actually, we're now in the process of sort of adding more content on there. The objective of that resource center is it's a global crisis center. We've got a business impact survey that any business can fill in. The idea is we'll aggregate that information, share it with the governments to say to them, hey, there's 50 businesses are going bankrupt, or there's 50 businesses that need you. One of the requests has been that each country sends an update into what are they doing in terms of border, policy, airlines. So anything updated you have, the idea is we're building out a global repository for crisis, for B2B. So hopefully in the
Excellent.
you'll see more of that happening. But the business survey impact is there already. It's not by size. You could be a one-man band. If you've got an impact, fill it away.
Fantastic.
Great.
Thank you for that.
Great. So we'll start our first bulletin from the Alliance next week, trying to agglomerate all this information. I think it would be useful.
I think it's a great idea. So I think that'd be, that'd be great. So that's a follow-up action point from one of our listeners that the Alliance will deliver. So fantastic. Do we have time for one more question or do we need to wrap up? Malik, your call.
If there's a brilliant question, go ahead. One last question.
Well, we've got one that touches on, we've got one that the last one that has come in has been about wellness travel, which I think is a good opportunity for people to start thinking of. And Dileep has also mentioned it earlier on. The question was around, is there traction for wellness travel for international tourists for Sri Lanka? What are our thoughts on that? We might look at doing something more deep dive on this later, but just as a snippet, what is everyone's thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, so the out of the total wellness market, 86% of the wellness travelers are basically 86% of the business is coming from travelers who like to have an experience of wellness while they are on travel. So that's one element of it, right? The second one is that there is a perception and a connotation of that, if you're getting into, I mean, definition of wellness is there's 2-3 elements: mental, physical, and mind, etc., all included. So mind, body, wellness. So if that is basically, if people are more fit enough, if these are actually physically fit and mentally fit, they can actually face the COVID better than the rest of the people. So that's another perception that's been built. So as a result, that's the bit of a cue, which basically people have been sort of attracted to wellness. And before COVID, wellness was the fastest growing segment. And then post-COVID, I think it will remain so because of this has supplemented that thinking. And people are now looking at, so as a result, you're opening up a plethora of activities in wellness, starting from not only just a massage or a spa treatment, it is much beyond that. And then people who can want to capitalize on it, I think there is an opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's going to be big. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
No, you go, Malik.
Yeah, I was saying, I mean, with the post-COVID focus on slow travel, sustainable travel, off-grid locations, I think wellness is going to be a huge element. And that's something that Sri Lanka should take advantage of, using our Ayurveda heritage, our traditional Helavedakama heritage, and so on. So that is something, a key goal that we should follow. Sorry, Sarah, you were saying something.
No, I was going to say exactly the same. My last time I was in Sri Lanka, which is in October, I had a great 2 days doing Ayurvedic. It was wonderful. I did miss coffee a little bit, but luckily enough, there was a coffee shop around the corner, which is a bit naughty of me, but I still managed.
You should drink tea when you're here.
Okay. Can I tell you the volume of tea that I drink and buy? You won't need to worry. I absolutely agree that standard wellness as we know it will continue. It'll be critical for businesses to really manage how they manage cleanliness, because that's going to be very, very sensitive. But I think broader than that, I think, as Malik was saying, getting out into the open, how about hikes? You've got an amazingly beautiful, beautiful country for hikes. Through hikes is an incredibly popular subject. It's small groups, very high end. For example, in the UK, they do something called Coast to Coast. You pay a lot of money. They actually pick up your luggage every day, take it to a beautiful hotel, but you hike across. So I'm thinking just in terms of some of the places that you could develop some really nice, either half day, full day, 5-day routes, cycling routes. All of these are huge opportunities for Sri Lanka. And the good news is it's not a massive effort to kind of suddenly develop them. You've got the sort of the structure in place. It's just about aligning them a little bit. So I'd consider that as well. Responsible tourism is going to be even more critical, especially for the younger generation. That's going to go into animal welfare, volume of travelers in one location. So managing the load at Sigiriya, how do we do that? So there are some sort of longer term principles that need to be addressed here. But I think the first thing is wellness and health. But I will always say the thing I love the most about Sri Lanka is that generosity that you always show in that Aibawan spirit, especially during the Buddha's birthday, where everyone is out on the street giving you a gift. that is never seen anywhere else. And I think that generosity of spirit, Katherine knows I've got a stat for that, but essentially that's what travelers are looking for. The good news right now, that they want to be able to be nearer. So yeah, I definitely think that's an opportunity.
Excellent.
That is such a great, I think that's fantastic. I think I'm going to hand over to Malik because I think that was a beautiful kind of segue.
Yeah, great. So that's a wrap. Sarah's, the comments you made now actually is a perfect segue into our next webinar, which is on the 12th of June, which is about the experience economy, how to reset Sri Lanka sustainably and drive visitor spend for all sectors of the industry, whether your business targets backpackers, families, groups, or couples. This is going to be a webinar that explores many of the topics that Sarah was talking in terms of what the post-COVID traveler is looking for, how to develop our product, tourism product sustainably. So I'd like to thank all of you, Hermione, who left us already, for these valuable insights. We've had a great audience on Zoom as well as on social media. I'd like to thank our simulcast partners who broadcasted on their channels. A shout out behind the scenes, we have Arti, who's our operations director, and Nishanti, who's the industry engagement manager, who've been beavering away. Thank you to them. And I hope you all found this session successful. Success for you in terms of ideation, and look forward to seeing you at the next session on the 12th of June. Thank you, everybody, especially to the panelists and to Katherine.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.